Alright, in this video I'm going to be framing out this wet wall in my basement. In a previous video I did the framing around the duct. Now I'm going to frame around a few other things, specifically this plumbing and this post. I'm going to bring it out a little further just to make everything in line with the existing walls. And I'm going to have it about 10.5 inches off the 2x4s that are holding up the stairwell. I'm going to bring it at least to 64 inches, which will be far enough to clear past the plumbing. But in the end, I actually bring it to 71 inches and I just tie it into that 2x4. And that's just to make the drywalling a little bit easier later so I don't have to do additional framing. So I do bring the wall a little further than it has to go to clear that plumbing, but it's not that much further. I'm losing maybe 5 or 6 inches here, and it's not that intrusive into the room. For doing this, all I've got is 2x4s, and then I have one single treated 2x4. The treated 2x4 is going to be my bottom plate. So I've already cut the treated 2x4 at about 71.5 inches, and that's going to be my bottom plate for this wall. And then for the top plate, I'm using untreated wood, also a 2x4, and that's going to be cut at the exact same length as the treated 2x4. And that'll give me my top and bottom plate for this section of wall. To measure the height of the studs, I just throw the top and bottom plate on the floor and measure to where it needs to be. I'm sure there's other ways to do that, but that's the way I generally do it. And then I just take that measurement and I start cutting the studs. I do take a few measurements down the length of the wall to make sure that the floor is actually level. It's a little bit off, so going left to right, I do increase the height of the wall slightly, and that's just to compensate for any dips in the concrete and stuff like that. But you won't notice that once it's drywalled up. So I cut 6 studs, 1 top plate and 1 bottom plate. And before I screw and nail everything together, I'm just going to take some of this cut end wood preservative and slap it on the cut end of the treated 2x4. That may or may not be necessary, but I did it anyway. Now I'm going to lay out where all the studs are going to go, and I'm going to put everything at 16 inches on center. So I'm going to mark that on the top and bottom plate, and I'm going to use a combination square to mark it off so that the line is on the top and bottom plate, and that makes it easier to lay out the studs between the top and bottom plate. One thing to note, because this is not going to be a load-bearing wall, and in fact there's no real way for the floor joist to actually put any load on this wall, I'm only doing a single top plate. If I was making this wall connected to the floor joist, I would probably go with a double top plate. And I'll take a minute to lay out all of the studs. One thing to note when you're using treated wood, they actually have nails and screws specifically for treated wood, and those screws and nails are ACQ certified, and they should say PT compliant on them, or they should somewhere indicate that they can be used with pressure treated lumber. Now for putting the wall together, I put a screw into each end of the studs through the top and bottom plate, and that's just to hold everything tightly together before I nail it. I don't have an air nailer and I don't want to get one, so I do put one screw in, and that's just to suck everything tight, and then I smash 2 nails into each end of the studs. And the nails I'm using here are pretty big, but it's just the box of nails I have. They are 16D and they are 3.5 inches, so probably a little bit bigger than I would use if I was going to just buy these at the store. But like I said, it's what I've got, so I'm going to use up that box while I've got it. But they will make for a fairly sturdy wall. And once I've got the top and bottom plates secured to the studs, I'll just put the wall into position. And it's a pretty short wall. Like I said, it's less than 8 feet long, and it's not particularly tall, so it's not a very heavy wall. And to get it into position, I sort of tap it loosely into position, and then I slowly work it into a position where the wall is plumb, and it has to be plumb in a couple different angles as well. So it can't just be front and back. It could also lean side to side a little bit. And then the other thing I'm going to want to do, because the drywall is going to line up on this end, I'm going to want to make sure that it's actually square as well, so that the drywall actually sits on those 2x4s nice and squarely. Once I've got the wall where I want it and I'm happy that it's plumb and square and looking pretty reasonable, I'm going to use a ram set nailer to secure it to the floor first, and then after I got it secured to the floor, I'll check and make sure it's plumb again, and then I'll secure the top plate. So this nailer takes a 22 caliber cartridge, and then you put the nail in the end and fire it in. Of note, I do wear safety glasses and ear defenders, and then while I'm doing this, I just make sure that it's an equivalent distance away from the stairwell at all times. In this case, it's about 10.5 inches all the way down the line. And once it's nailed into the floor, I still have the option of moving it sort of forward and backwards a little bit to ensure that it's actually plumb. And for this, I use 5 nails into the concrete. Now that it's secure to the floor, I'll work my way down the wall, ensuring that each of the 2x4s are actually plumb before I secure the top plate to the framing of the ductwork. So there we go, it's pretty good. And to secure the top plate to the framing, I'm just going to use construction screws, and all the construction screws I've got are 2.5 inches in length. If this were a load-bearing wall or connected to the floor joists, I would be using structural screws. These construction screws are not the same as a structural screw. Okay, so that's what the first wall looks like. You can see that it's quite close to the plumbing, so I've got it fairly tight. And then the next thing I'm going to do is build 2 small walls. They're just going to connect the new wall I've built to the wall that is connected to the stairwell. And for this, I do the same procedure. I cut the treated wood, which is going to be the bottom plate, at 10.5 inches, and that's for both ends of this thing. And then I cut the top plate, which is just going to be a regular 2x4, also at 10.5 inches. And then for the height of the wood, I'm using the exact same height as the rest of the walls. So these little return walls are going to look uniform. And that's all I need for these is 2 2x4s for the studs and then a small top and bottom plate. So I'll do the exact same thing, 1 screw into both the top and bottom plate, and then I'll nail 2 nails into each end of the studs. And I only show myself building one of these things because the other one I put together the exact same way. And just like the first wall, these are obviously very light, so they're easy to put into place. And because they're so short, they're also very easy to line up. It'll be pretty obvious if it's plumb and square. I will break out a square to make sure everything's lined up well, and then I'll fire 1 nail from the ram set to secure it to the floor. One thing to note, sometimes the ram set doesn't fully seat the nail, so I use a sledgehammer to put it in that extra 1/4 inch or whatever if it hasn't fully set to the bottom plate. And with the bottom plate secured, I'll just secure the top plate to the framing above it, and that's pretty much it. I do put a couple screws in to the studs to secure the new wall to the existing walls, but I really don't see a requirement to go too crazy with that. And here's the other one that I put in. Again, same deal, has a top plate, bottom plate, and then just 2 2x4s. That one was probably unnecessary. The drywall probably could have just held on with what was existing. And then I did add 1 additional 2x2, and that's just to bring the framing out a little further so I could secure drywall to it in the future. And that's pretty much it. It's all good to go and ready for drywall. I got a few other things to do before I do the drywall, but I will get to that eventually. One other thing I could do is add some fire blocking, which would just be a horizontal 2x4 at about 4 feet between each of the studs. It's not really necessary in this case. If I have scrap 2x4s, I might do it just to add some rigidity to the wall. Anyway, that's what it looks like. Fast and easy, and it's ready for drywall pretty much. Anyway, thanks for checking out my video. Don't forget to like and subscribe.